All right. Thank you. So this will be recorded and saved on the library YouTube channel. All right. My name is Jackie Werner, and I am the Scholarly Communications and Research Librarian. And today I'm going to be talking about research data management. And let me get over here. All right. So the first question is, why do you care about research data management? If you're doing if you're doing research, if you've done it before, you've done something with your data and it's probably all worked out. But RDM or research data management has some great opportunities and also some great pitfalls if you don't pay attention to it. So I'm going to go over some examples of why it's a good idea to uh, really pay attention to and plan how you manage your research data. So, first of all, the good or positive reasons. The first one is that data can be an asset. Um, the im- your research is not just important because of the end goal, because of the final published paper or presentation. The actual data itself can be incredibly useful to other people. And for example, public data sets are frequently used by other researchers since all this data, other people can look at it and find things, focus on things that you did not. And you can also get credit for the use of your data, just as if, just like you would get credit for the use of your research and citations. This can go in your CV, for instance, and using alt metrics or alternate research metrics, um, you can actually get credit for these things that you might not have thought of before. You can get credit for people, say, discussing your work on social media. You can get credit um, for people using your data for more studies. And if you're putting your data out there and not just your final project, then it can be a really nice boon to you and your career. And then there's the bad. So this is not actually bad, but uh, sharing your data can also be a requirement. A lot of funding bodies and journals are now requiring that you have a data management plan and that some of them that you know how you're going to share your data. For example, if you get a grant from the NIH, any grant above 500,000 must submit a data sharing plan. And this can include saying it's not possible to share your data because there's too much protected health information, for instance. And the NSF, all grants must include a data management plan. And I'll share these links later. They're links to talking about the data management. So data management can't be an afterthought if you are getting a grant, because even if you can't share your data, you have to think about why that is and figure out how to best do it. And journal requirements. For example, PANS requires that your materials, data, and associated protocols, including code and scripts, are made available to readers. So if you publish in this journal, your data will need to be presentable. And I'll talk about how to do this. And the National Research Council made a recommendation that that your data should be shared whenever you do research. And last, the ugly. This is what happens if you don't think about data management. And these are some situations you might have heard of. Our postdoc left, and now no one knows where the data is or what it means. Where did all that protected health information go? And aren't we supposed to dispose of this data? If once again, if you leave your data management as an afterthought, you can run into some big problems uh, when you have to do some things you weren't thinking about before. All right, so that's the overview of why research data management is important. Now, what can you do about it? There's three steps to this that I'll be going over. First is understanding the data life cycle. Knowing where the data goes will be from the beginning of your project to the end. Next is follow best practices, and I'll give you some examples of that. And the last is developing a data management plan, which, for a little more work at the beginning of your research, can save your life throughout it. All right, first off, the data life cycle. So this is from NYU Libraries, and this is one rendition of the data cycle. And a lot of it's self-explanatory, but I'll go over step by step. First off, create data. That's when you're doing your research. Um, Pretty much anything you create in the course of doing your research is data. Next step is processing it, or getting that raw data into an actually usable format. Once you've done that, you can then analyze the data many different ways, SAS, SPSS, or all sorts of different ways to look at the statistics. Then preserving data. A lot of the time, you're going to want to save the data if you go back to the research, if if a reader reads your publication and asks questions about the data, or if you want to preserve it online for other people to use. And that leads to publishing data. You don't have to stick to publishing the findings. You can actually publish the data itself. Sometimes there are specific journals that will publish data. You can put it under Creative Commons license and have it freely available on a data repository. And this can include several steps of the data. For example, your raw data, your processed data, and your analyzed data. And if you publish data, people can reuse it. You can reuse it if you want to do further analyses and go in a different direction, or other people can. And research data management covers all steps of this data lifecycle. All right, before I go to best practices, any questions? All right, let's go there and try to get back to the right tab. Chrome is not making this easy. All right, come on. There we go. All right, back to best practices. So, uh, the first step in data analysis is, or in data management, is planning. And I keep hammering this point home, but you really want to know how you're collecting your data and what you're going to do with it from the very beginning of your project. So first off, you want to develop data backup policies. And this is going to be backup for all of your data, not just digital. For example, if you have paper lab notebooks and paper surveys, if a disaster happens and they get lost or destroyed, or somebody or one of your researchers leaves your lab and takes the notebooks with them, then you want to have some form of backup for those as well. And speaking of one person leaving your lab and you don't know where the data is, it's really important to assign responsibilities for data. Which position in your lab or your research group or your grant will be in charge of data collection and data management upkeep? If positions will change in the middle, for instance, if you're giving it to a student who will be graduating, It's important to know how you're going to pass on responsibilities. Have a written plan of how you're going to deal with that. Then, even before you start doing the research, uh, it's good to take a look at potential data repositories or journals that you might be interested in publishing data in. Uh, will the journals that you're thinking of, do they require data publication? Do they allow it if it's not required? And what are their guidelines? Just like before you start writing a paper, an article, you want to look at the journal that you're submitting it to. Do the same thing for data. And the last step of planning is determining the budget for data. And importantly, this data cost can be a part of a grant. If you need to pay a salary for someone to work with data, or if you want to deposit it in a paid repository, something open access, you can actually include this in your grant. All right, so next is collecting the data. First off, you want to know exactly what you'll be collecting. So you want to define and list all the types of data that you're collecting and the file formats it will be. For example, if you're keeping Excel files, something like that, text files, and so on. Then from the very beginning, you want to choose naming conventions. And some of the guidelines for that, for naming your files, include the same information in the same order. Never use the same name in different folders. I'm sure we've all been guilty of this, naming a file like data.xlsx and just knowing which it is because it's in the folder of your project. If you get if that folder hierarchy isn't preserved, then you're just going to have a file named data and no idea what it refers to until you go in and compare it. In file names, it's best to use underscores and camel case instead of spaces. And I'll show you an example in the next slide. And also, you want it to be extensible. For example, if you know you're going to be collecting hundreds of data points, then you're going to want to put zeros at the beginning of the number from the start. Then when it's listed on your computer, it'll be listed in correct numerical order instead of 1, then 10, then 11, and etc. And finally, you want to preserve your raw data. You'll have to go in and clean up your data before you analyze it or if you publish it. But you also want to keep a specific copy of the data at each step. When you're preserving your raw data, you also want to document steps that you're taking to clean the data. Basically, it's just like a methods section. If if somebody looked at this, would they be able to redo what you have done? And here's an example of a good naming convention for an image file. So this one in particular, it has a camel case in the experiment series name, which is Aether Rat. You have the experiment number, EX012, and that's extensible. You have norm, which in this case stands for a normal heart, the treatment provided, which is Lipitor, and the slice number, 056. And obviously, this is a very specific example, but the same type of thing can really help you keep your data clear, especially if you're keeping something like groups of different images. Then it's really good to be able to know what you're looking at from the file name. Keeps things simple, makes it easier for you and for anyone using the data after you. And the next step in best practices is to describe your data. So you always want to have README files. And these are just going to be text files um, and that describe the organization, the responsible parties for the data, and your instruments. Basically, something that gives context to all this data. And once again, this is not just useful if it's being shared so others can reproduce your research. It's useful if, oh my God, this person is on vacation. What? I have no idea what this file name is. And next, you also want to have like a general README for your whole project, and then specific READMEs for the contents of specific data files. And this will just go into detail about each file. What are the parameters, the contents, what are the formats for the data, for date and time, what measurements are you using, etc. Once again, giving context so that it's easier for you to uh, just be able to use your data and continue producing it. You also want to have a meaningful directory hierarchy. In other words, don't put everything in one folder labeled uh, project. Here you want to have, say, going back to the rat here, you might want to have different folders for each experiment or each subject, and so on. Just something that makes sure it is separated and that you can easily get to what you want. And finally, you need to have a data dictionary. And this just explains all the terms used in your files and folders in one place. If you've used REDCap, for instance, your data dictionary will have all of your variables over every survey, and you'll be able to tell at a glance everything that you're looking at. Next comes processing and analyzing your data. The first step for this is double checking your data entry. And this is where I really recommend using something like REDCap, because even if you're not emailing out a survey to people, REDCap lets you easily double check data entry and make sure that, say, this specific data entry has been looked over by two different people. It's right. Let's go on to the next one. You also want to use consistent missing value coding. So something like 999, something that's not going to show up in the normal course of your research, is good, and it makes it a lot easier to process your data if all the missing values are coded the same way. And then you want to document all data analysis you're doing. Once again, this is like your method section. You want to include the steps and the complete software information so that this is replicable. A lot of most software is going to have certain updates with different versions. So just in case something important changes between versions, you want to have the complete information for that. All right, close this. Okay, and then comes the publishing and sharing step. So once again, document all processing that you do to make your data shareable. And one really important thing is to save data in stable formats. This you're looking for lossless data compression that's supported by multiple software platforms. For example, .csv instead of an Excel file, a text file instead of a Word file. And there's a lot of guidelines as to what exactly, what formats you should use. But basically, you're looking to use things that are not proprietary. So you need a specific piece of software to read it. And include documentation with enough to make this data reusable. For instance, the title, creator, a persistent identifier like a DOI, any funders, dates, file format, etc. And finally, preserving your data. So this is actually done throughout the whole process. But best practice is to keep 3 copies of your data, and that's usually original, on-site, and off-site or remote. And all of the different storage options have pros and cons. If you're using personal computer and laptops, that could be wiped or lost. Network storage, external storage, removable storage, remote storage on the cloud. Um, Basically, the idea of having 3 different copies is that you cover for the pros and cons. So if something wrong may happen, but all 3 things are probably not going to go down at once. You also want to back up your data regularly. And I believe this is already done for data stored on the Pcom servers. Um, and for hard to replicate data, make sure to back up that daily because it's better to be safe than sorry. You want to store your final data using stable file formats, as I talked about before, using the lossless data compression, not proprietary software. You want to know from the beginning how long you're going to be storing this data. Is it something that you want to keep available forever? Is this something you want to get rid of 5 years after publication, etc.? And finally, consider data security. Um, you'll want to classify your data by sensitivity level. For example, if you're working with protected health information, then you're probably going to want to put in your IRB how you're keeping this data secure. And a lot of this is going to be kind of boilerplate that you could use in any different IRB. For example, the it is kept in a it's kept on a computer in a locked lab. Um, Whatever PCOM's security measures are, etc. And also, researchers should know who's accessing this data and when they're doing it. Uh, and that depends where it is in the process. But once again, something like REDCap can tell you exactly who is doing what to data, which is very nice. All right. And then there's data management plans. So this could be an entire presentation on its own. But data management plans are something that you do from the beginning of before you do your research, just planning all the data you're going to collect and what you're going to do with it. And these components include data collection, data description, storage, any protection or privacy needs, sharing and access to the data, and data preservation. And there is an excellent free website called dmptool.org. I won't go over it in depth, but it has tools for making many data management plans. It lets you share one plan with specific people. And as you could see on this screenshot, it also includes guidance with different guidelines on data management plans and what should go in each section. And those guidelines are really great if you have no idea what you're doing, you've never done a DMP before. They can give you a great idea of what you want to save. And finally, links to DMP tool and a lot of other data management information is available on our research libguide. And can I copy and paste this link? Maybe. I will try to copy and paste this link in the chat. All right. So that is my presentation on a very brief overview of research data management. Do you have any questions?
Hi, Jackie. This is Barbara. I do have a
Yes.
question. Can we upload data sets to Digital Commons, to the Pcom Digital Commons?
Yes. We don't currently have any on there right now, but that is definitely an institutional repository that is capable of keeping your data just as if you could put your publications on the Digital Commons. You might be interested, though, in looking into, there's a lot of subject specific um, data repositories out there. And when you're looking for discoverability of your data, you might want to put it on there. Then again, keeping it on the on Pcom Digital Commons can also keep it connected right to your publications. So if you're interested in that, definitely please send me an email, and I'll be happy to work with you.
So you would include that in your IRB proposal?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
All right. And I am going to put a link to just a survey on this presentation. It would be really great if you could fill that out. And also, I'm going to attempt to copy this link and send it to you. All right, this is overly complicated. Well, as I'm doing that, any more questions? All right. Okay, the link to our LibGuide is in the chat with links on data management. If you want to, if you have any more questions or want help coming up with a DMP using DMP tool, then please send me an email. Also in the chat now. All right. And I guess we could stop the recording now. Thank you